Hello, I'm Maiki Oreta, and welcome to Trade Talks, where we sit down with industry leaders, innovators, and change makers who are shaping markets, challenging norms, and making an impact. Here we explore the strategies that drive progress and the challenges that push industries and communities forward, and the ideas reshaping the way we work and live. What's new, what matters, and what's next? Let's find out. Our maiden episode, with the economy at a crossroads, how do we spur growth and attract investors? Inflation is cooled, but growth remains subdued. The stock market lacks momentum, foreign investors continue to unload shares, and the peso is under pressure. Now, political uncertainty adds to the mix. With the House moving to impeach Vice President Sara Duterte, what does this mean for business confidence? Meanwhile, a report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD, a global policy group that analyzes economic trends, reveals that the Philippines has the fewest listed companies in the ASEAN, and IPO activity has stalled. So what's holding companies back from going public? How do we rebuild confidence in our capital markets? And what reforms are needed to attract long-term investors? Joining us to break it all down is EJ Qua Hiansen, the president of FINEX, the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, the country's leading network of financial executives. Good morning, EJ. Thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, Maiki. Thank you for having me.
Okay, EJ, big picture first. How would you assess the overall health of the Philippine economy?
I think longer term, if you look at the Philippines, we were in the past one of the strongest economies in Asia, a model for others to follow. I think the economic fundamentals are there for us to get back to that level in the future. NEDA has something that they call the Ambition Natin 2040, where they're pushing for us to be a prosperous middle-class nation by 2040. We can get there, but obviously we're coming from a challenging time. We're still recovering from the pandemic, and economic growth last year was a little bit slower than we expected. But again, our companies are continuing to invest to achieve those ambitions.
Yeah, economic growth came in at 5.6% in 2024, shy of the government's 6 to 6.5 target for that period. What's holding growth back, EJ?
Okay, I think if you look at the components of GDP, it's really three parts. First is consumption. And if we look at consumption, 17.5 million pesos are at the poverty level or below. With food inflation the way it was, and that was one of the larger drivers of inflation last year, that really took a lot out of their pockets, so they couldn't consume in other areas that were value additive to the economy. So that's on consumption. Second, if we look at net exports, we're still a net importer as a country, meaning we're still bringing in more goods and services rather than earning income from exporting our goods and services abroad. And thirdly would be government spending. And if we look at government spending for the past few years, it's largely been delayed into the second half, so the economic benefits of that spending doesn't get fully realized until later on the year. And again, while the project is delayed, so are the benefits.
Absolutely. Speaking of government spending, let's talk about the 2025 national budget. You co-signed a position paper with top socioeconomic organizations in the Philippines, like Management Association of the Philippines and the Makati Business Club and the UP School of Economics, among other organizations. Tell us about this position paper that you signed. I know that it had to do with the diversion of funds from high priority infrastructure spending to more discretionary spending. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. If I were to simplify the position paper, what we're really pushing for is greater transparency in the budgeting process, and for the budget to be focused on areas that will really aid the long-term and, of course, short-term needs of the country. And so what do I mean by that? Former Senator Frank Drilon has estimated that over the last 2 years, the pork barrel has increased by 750 billion pesos, right? We've had projects that were high priority infrastructure projects. Some of the funding from that and from social goods like PhilHealth and education have been diverted more towards those pork barrel concepts.
Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned that, EJ. It's an election year. We've got the midterm elections coming up. So rather than spending on the critical infrastructure projects, that money has been diverted to the discretionary spending for the elections. What does that mean in your eyes for an election year, where that money's going?
Well, ideally, of course, those projects would go through and they would be funding projects that are necessary. But of course, that still leaves the room of human interest, right?
Human interest, you mean pork barrel?
I didn't want to put it in those words, but if you look at FINEX, for example, what we really know are budgets. And as we go through budgets with our companies, we really try to ensure that the budget is as transparent as possible, that the line items that we want our companies to spend and invest on are as clear as possible, and we try to eliminate as much discretionary spending as we can.
Why is discretionary spending bad in an election year?
Again, that does allow for, I guess, the people who need these social services the most, they might have to rely on political patronage to get access to the social goods that they require.
All right. Another thing on the political front, the House's move to impeach Vice President Sara Duterte. Markets thrive on stability, whereas political shock, on the other hand, makes everybody cautious. What's your take on how this is going to impact the appetite of local and foreign investors?
I think it's too early to tell the impact of the impeachment longer term on local and foreign investors. But to your point on political stability, I think what both of these investor sets will look for is that the rule of law is followed and that the country has the highest standards of governance that we can do.
That said, I mean, just on the political front, impeaching the vice president of a country, how big of a red flag is this for an investor?
I mean, it certainly will raise alarms. But again, I think there also would be concerned with how does the process go moving forward? Is it something that we follow the rule of law and we go through the process correctly, and that the end result is what the end result is?
What are the dangers of this process, however way it may go?
I guess it would be more in terms of entering an election year. Do we see a lot of these political noise, and do the legislators continue to focus on what the country needs? Are we going to put aside some of the key items that need to be done to focus on, I guess, more political concerns? Or will they continue to focus on these key legislative items that they have prioritized?
So what do you think the country needs right now? What are the key legislative items that we need in 2025 for a better every year after?
That's a big question.
You can break it down.
Sure. I think there's a few different areas that we can prioritize on as a country. One, education. When I talked about our young growing population that will position us for the future, in order for us to really capture that demographic dividend, that population needs to be educated so they can get good jobs and they can do well in those jobs. And also so that they have the ability to start up their own companies and really grow the infrastructure ecosystem here, entrepreneurship ecosystem here in the Philippines. Second, in terms of ease of doing business, the more we can ease doing business and eliminate red tape, I think that's something that would be very positive for investors. We do have to review, and I think the government has taken good steps in terms of passing recently the Create More and the Build, Operate, Transfer revisions to see that our policies are more investor-friendly so that we can attract these foreign investors into the country and they can help us build our nation moving forward.
And how do we grow the capital markets? How do you suggest we grow? I mean, look at the Philippine Stock Exchange Index. Today, right now, as of 11:11 this morning, we are down 0.6% to 6115. And we're at the 6,000 level. Interestingly, we first touched this level in 2013, about 12 years after. We're still at that same level. The dire condition of the PSEI. Why, despite the growth, has our index not grown?
Sure. We do have to differentiate between the growth of the economy and the growth of the stock exchange. Looking specifically at the PSE and our listed companies, the companies themselves have been continuing to perform well. They have been continuing to invest, and they have been growing their corporate earnings over time. But I think what we really need to do is deepen our investor base. And you can split that into two different areas. When we look at our local investors, again, I mentioned 17.5 million are at or below poverty. There's a lot of people in the Philippines that are not yet well informed about what the stock market is, how to invest, and what kind of returns they can expect from stocks. And not just the stock market, but the overall suite of financial products.
Yeah.
So on the part of FINEX, we do have a few different programs that we're pushing to help strengthen that. We do a lot of financial literacy with end users, but we also do education in terms of training finance educators in our colleges and universities. And we do host an annual intercollegiate finance competition amongst the top finance students in the nation. So these are different areas that we're using to bolster the local investor. Again, in terms of the foreign investor, it's pushing more on these governance reforms, making sure that we're as transparent as can be, that the incentives that they get or that they're promised, they're able to really return, and so that they have that expectation of their investments.
On the education front, how do you suggest we deepen that bench to create more local investors, more people interested in participating in the stock market? It just goes to show, I mean, education. We didn't learn about the stock market in school. What do you think needs to be done on the education front so that the next generation of kids are more financially literate and more attuned to the investments that can be made?
I think it really starts at the school level, right? If we can start pushing financial literacy at the school level, that gives our students the basics. But the other part of it is we also have to start training their employers, their families, so that these are ways that they can continue to learn. I, for example, learned my basics in stocks from my family, right? If it's not going to be taught at school, you have to learn it somewhere. So one of the things that we've done at FINEX, for example, in the financial literacy, we've actually translated our books, our textbooks, to Filipino, so that it's in the vernacular of those that we're trying to reach.
All right, we're going to be taking a quick break. Hold that thought. Trade Talks will be right back. Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360 where we break down the numbers.
This week we saw the S&P 500 make a new historic high.
Connect the dots.
They withdrew from the World Health Organization.
And give you the developments and insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Ayala Corporation is funding artificial intelligence and data science research at the University of the Philippines.
Business 360, hosted by Maiki Oreta.
Keep it here on BNC.
The Bilyonaryo News Channel.
Hello, I'm Rain Musni. Catch up with us on Newsfeed Business.
Facts on global trends.
At the very moment, the clock is quickly ticking down to meet critical political priorities.
Keeping you updated on business news whenever, wherever.
It's a dagger at the heart of the average American family. It is just outrageous.
Newsfeed Business with Rain Musni.
Thanks for making us your daily source of financial insights.
Keep it here on BNC.
Welcome back to Trade Talks, where we're continuing our discussion with FINEX President EJ Qua Hiansen. Hi, EJ. Okay, so before we went on gap, we talked about how to deepen the bench, how to get more people interested in investing in the stock market. Now, on another front, how do we get more companies interested in listing on the Philippine Stock Exchange?
Okay. Yeah, I think it really just starts with, again, deepening the investor base, right? Because companies will only list if they're able to raise the funds that they need. Right? And in order to do that, they have to be able to reach a wide range of investors. Secondly, the more we can ease the process of listing, I think that will really help them out. So the recent bill that both houses of Congress passed to reduce the stock transaction tax and to also reduce the documentary stamp tax in these listings, I think these are helpful ways to reduce those transaction costs and possibly spur some liquidity in the stock exchange.
How helpful? How much more participation do you expect to see with the passage of this?
I think it's just a starting point. Again, it goes down to that education point that I keep harping on, right? Until people really know what they're investing in, until they know the companies they're investing in, the costs aren't a factor yet.
All right. Now, talk to us about where we are right now in this IPO space. Since 2000, only 95 companies have raised $13 billion in IPOs. In comparison, Vietnam's 584 companies raising $36 billion. talk to us about the gaps that we need to fill.
There's actually a lot of strong Philippine companies that aren't listed. We should be encouraging them to list. If you look at those other countries, they have that wide range that you mentioned, but there's also more liquidity in their stock market. If you look at the average daily turnover here in the Philippines, it's very low compared to what you're seeing in the Vietnamese market, compared to what you're seeing in Thailand. So there's a little bit of chicken and egg, right? Investors are looking for issuances that they can invest in. At the same time, the issuers are looking to make sure that there's investors, and it has to start from somewhere. So the more that we can push these different ideas, the more we can grow the market together. It really takes more than just a couple of people to grow this market.
Absolutely. In other ASEAN countries, state-owned enterprises make up 15 to 20% of market capitalization, yet the Philippines has none listed. Do you think our state-owned companies should go public?
I think it's something that they should definitely look at as one, a way to invite public participation in terms of their planning. And second, again, as you mentioned, these are critical large-size companies that are driving a lot of things. This will also improve, I think, the governance behind these state-owned corporations.
All right. Yeah, Land Bank and DBP, it'd be interesting to see those names listed. Well-trusted names, right? Let's talk about some forecasts. Inflation, interest rates, and GDP. Choose your own adventure. Which one do you want to talk about first?
I think adventure is the right word. We've been seeing more and more volatility. I guess we'll start on GDP.
Okay.
The government does have a target, and I think a lot of investors have been looking at the 6% range. That's the range that we're also looking at for GDP growth this year, assuming, again, that the different items I talked about happen, that the infrastructure spending starts early in the year so that we feel the impacts all throughout the year, assuming a more benign inflation environment, and assuming that our foreign exchange also stays within range.
Okay. Your targets and many others' targets for 2025 is for growth of 6%, whereas the government has a bigger band, 6 to 8%. What sort of inflation level do we need in order to hit the lower to higher band of the government's target?
I think the inflation range that we've been seeing over the last year is a range that we can handle, right? While it is a little bit higher on the food side, we look at oil coming down. I think it's at a 1-month low right now, and that does provide some more room. What would be interesting, and I think what will really help spur the growth a little bit more, is on the interest rate side.
Yeah.
So Governor Ramalana has mentioned that the BSP is looking at 2 rate cuts within the year, both of 1/4 percentage point, one in the first half and one in the second half. And at least on our level, we're looking at the first cut to be in the next meeting on Feb 13.
Yeah, this Thursday. The BSP's Monetary Board meets this Thursday to talk about interest rates. So you'd say the market is pricing in a 25 bips cut.
Yes.
All right. Where would that bring us?
In
terms of how much support would it give for GDP growth? And at the same time, it's also a bit inflationary.
Right. Inflation is something that we'll have to continue to watch, and I think that's what's really going to be the biggest lookout of the BSP as they adjust rates within the year. But it will lower the transaction costs or borrowing costs for companies, and will allow us to continue to invest in the projects that we believe in.
Speaking of projects that you believe in, as the president of FINEX, what are your key priorities and expectations for 2025?
In terms of FINEX itself, or for the economy?
In terms of FINEX and the economy, what are your goals?
Sure. For FINEX itself, our theme for the year is shaping the future, leadership and innovation in Philippine business. And the reason we chose that theme is that during periods of high volatility, which is where we are today, we go back to the fundamentals of leadership in Philippine business and innovation, the need to continuously do these. So the activities that we're doing, we're aiming to continue to develop our members, both professionally and personally. We try to have programming that will be attractive to them so that they continue to learn and they can bring this back to their companies. For example, our next speaker at our general membership meeting will be former ambassador to the United States, former Bangko Sentral governor, Ambassador Jose Quisha, to talk about the implications of the Trump presidency on the Philippines. Because that's something that all of our members have been asking about. Back 20 years ago when I was just entering the market, they used to say that when the U.S. sneezes, Asia
Everyone
catches a cold, right?
Yeah.
That's
Still
something
holds
that's
true
still
today,
happening today.
yeah.
So we need to see what kind of cold we have or we could have so that we can prescribe the right medication.
Absolutely. Okay. Your expectations for the economy in 2025?
I think a lot of it's going to be dominated by the elections. Right? I mean, in any election year, that's going to be a lot of what the driver is. But will we see continuity of the different plans that the government has had for the past 3 years? Because I think that the environment that has been created for business has been largely positive. We have and we continue to see our companies raising funds, investing it in longer-term projects, and things of this nature.
Okay. Advice for the next generation, for professionals that want to get into this finance space. What is your advice to them?
The first one I'd say is always keep learning. Finance is continuously evolving, so the need to learn to keep up and outpace that is important. Secondly, and related to the first point, is find a mentor. That's someone who can help you develop your career. You can learn from their history and their experiences. And third, in terms of finance and their careers, always think about how they can provide value to their organizations. And I think if you carry those things through and you operate with integrity and good ethics, you can build a good career in finance.
All right. Yeah. Mentorship and values. All right. Thank you for your time this morning, EJ. It was a pleasure to have you and to hear your thoughts on the economy and everything else.
My pleasure.
All right. And that's it for today's show. I'm Maiki Oreta. Stay up to date on the latest in business and the economy here on Trade Talks. Catch us again tomorrow, only here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel.